All right. Welcome everybody to the Port of Olympia Commission meeting. It's Monday, February 12th, 2024, and it's 5:30 p.m. We'll start the evening by having a Pledge of Allegiance. And if Commissioner Tong, would you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we talk about the agenda this evening, I wanted to bring up, several organizations and groups. They start their meeting and events with a statement acknowledging that they are convening on land that was once occupied by the indigenous people of the area. When Commissioner Harding and I were elected to office, we discussed that, having a land acknowledgement statement at our port meetings, and we made the decision to forego the land acknowledgement and focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. However, today is such an important day for tribes across this state and across the country. I'd like to share my thoughts in this brief statement before we start. So today marks the 50th anniversary of what is commonly known as the Bolt decision. This decision by Judge Bolt holds immense significance for the Medicine Creek Treaty Tribes and Native American communities across the United States. The Bolt decision, handed down by U.S. District Court Judge George H. Bolt on February 12, 1974, reaffirmed Native American tribes' treaty rights to half of the fish harvest in Washington State's usual and accustomed fishing areas. This landmark ruling marked a pivotal moment in Native American legal history and has had profound and lasting impacts on tribal sovereignty, resource management, and culture preservation. The U.S. versus State of Washington lawsuit, which culminated in the landmark Bolt decision, was a legal battle that centered on the interpretation and enforcement of tribal treaty rights pertaining to fishing in Washington State. The case emerged from long-standing disputes between Washington tribes, particularly the Medicine Creek Treaty Tribes, and the state of Washington over fishing rights guaranteed in treaties signed in the mid-19th century. For the Medicine Creek Treaty Tribes, which includes Nisqually, Squaxin Island, Puyallup, Muckleshoot, and others, the Bolt decision represents a crucial victory in our ongoing struggle to protect our traditional fishing rights. These tribes had signed the Medicine Creek Treaty with the United States government in 1854, which guaranteed the right to fish in our usual and accustomed areas. However, over the years, these rights were increasingly encroached upon by state regulations and non-native commercial fishermen. The Bolt decision reaffirmed the tribe's treaty rights as legally binding and recognized our inherent sovereignty over natural resources within our ancestral territories. By allocating 50% of the fish harvest to tribes, the ruling not only ensured our economic survival, but it also upheld our cultural identity and way of life, which are deeply entwined with the salmon. Beyond its immediate legal implications, the Bolt decision sparked broader discussions about tribal sovereignty, environmental stewardship, and the relationship between Native nations and the United States government. It set a precedent for the interpretation of treaty rights nationwide and inspired other tribes to pursue similar legal avenues and protect their sovereignty and natural resources. In the decades since the Bolt decision, the Medicine Creek Treaty Tribes have continued to assert our rights in various legal and political arenas advocating for the sustainable management of fisheries and the protection of our ancestral lands. The 50th anniversary of this landmark ruling provides an opportunity for reflection and its enduring significance, as well as a reminder of the ongoing challenges faced by Native American communities in our pursuit of justice and self-determination. From today through July 8th, the Washington State History Museum in Tacoma will display the original handwritten Article 3 of the 1854 Medicine Creek Treaty that guaranteed fishing rights to tribal treaty signers. This historic document, on loan from the National Archives and Records Administration, remains a powerful reminder of the complexity of the Native American experience, loss, resilience, and triumph over generations of struggle to maintain culture and identity. I urge everyone to visit the museum and witness this bit of history. The U.S. government forced these treaties on Native tribes to gain control over indigenous lands and people while advancing the broader goal of territorial expansion, economic development, and cultural assimilation. Today, the treaties that were forced upon our ancestors are the agreements that we rely on to remain sovereign, self-governing, self-reliant, and to preserve our culture. So thank you for indulging me in remembering today, the 50th anniversary of the Boldt decision, as such an important day to Native tribes in Washington State and across the country, including tribes who inhabited this land we are convened upon today. Thank you. So now we can move on to the agenda approval. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I had one motion to amend. I was hoping to move item F1 from the consent calendar down to the advisory calendar.
The process would be to motion to approve the agenda, get a second, and then we can take amendments. That's okay?
Yes, motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve today's agenda. Any discussion or amendments?
Yes, I think that we should move the item F1 from the consent calendar down into the advisory calendar, just so we have more time to look over the proposal.
Okay. Is there a second?
Question. Is there a point of information I could ask?
So typically when a motion is made, in order to continue discussion, we would take a second. That doesn't mean you're necessarily approval of the motion, but it at least gets the discussion to start. So we have a motion to amend the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
You second. Okay. Is there any discussion on the amendment?
Well, I just wanted to, I agree and would like to move this off the consent calendar. What I don't know is whether it should be moving to the advisory calendar or whether if there's going to be any direction coming out of it, even short of a resolution, a request for staff to do certain work, for example. Would it benefit from being an action other instead of the advisory calendar? And I'm a little confused about that.
Commissioners, if I may speak to that, I can perhaps provide some information. Based on what I heard, starting at the orientation and through the last commission meeting, my goal here was to respond to commissioners in creating an administrative document that took the three resolutions, consolidated them into one, and that's what the draft that I sent a couple of weeks ago was about. The goal here is to give the commissioners options. If you the first thing is, if it goes to action other, it can be approved without any change to content, but just administratively consolidating them before the new executive director is on board, which is what I thought I heard. If there is no intent by the commission to do it before then it can be moved to the advisory calendar and then come back 2 weeks later. Whatever it is the commission wants, I wanted to give you the opportunity and option to do whatever it is you wanted to do. So it's poised for your action one way or the other tonight.
So if I can just add to that, I mean, if you think that there is a possibility we could take action tonight, action other would be the place to put it. But if there's no chance, if you don't want to be, if you don't think we have any opportunity of taking action, then advisory.
In that case, I support moving it to the advisory calendar. I think I want to thank staff for pulling together these 3 different resolutions that are all part of the commission's delegation of authority to its executive director. What's in the packet is an amalgam of 2019-06, which governs contracts, 2019-07, which governs real property policies, and 21-21-04, which governs executive policies. But for me, they're just the starting point for a discussion of how we as a commission seek to now tweak that in a delegation of authority for a new executive director. So rather than confusing people by enacting these, now that they're visible, these 3, I think that they're our current delegation, and we can start having a conversation about how we want to change that as we move forward. So I support Commissioner Tong in moving this to advisory.
Yes, I would agree. Advisory.
Right? Any other?
And
Any
if I
other-
may add another point, commissioners, there, beyond the presentation that you see, there is no advisory. This was directed, as I took it from the commission, to bring this document. If we want to bring it back with some more detail, then I think it's going to perhaps need some discussion, perhaps tomorrow at our agenda setting meeting, as to what the appropriate method would be to bring it back.
Whether Executive Director Rudy, I believe that if we do move it to the advisory calendar, we could have discussion as the commission, and we could refine that direction that thank you guys would need. Any further discussion on the amendment to the agenda? Hearing none, I will call for the vote. There's a motion to move. Let me get back on the right page here. There is a motion to move consent calendar item number 1, the delegation of authority resolution. Motion is to move the item number 1 from the consent calendar to the advisory calendar. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, we have approved the amendment to the agenda. Now we have an agenda with an amendment. The agenda, let's see, then the motion would be to approve tonight's agenda with the aforementioned amendment. Is there any further discussion on that? Hearing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor of the amended agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, we have an agenda. Next on the agenda is the Executive Director report. Executive Director Rudolph, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, Missy, you said it was going to work, but it's not.
They're gone.
It's on. How about if we just go to the next slide? On January 12th, we hosted our annual Winter Staff Appreciation event. We came together to honor our team and commemorate their remarkable accomplishments and years of service. Congratulations to the following Service Award Port Staff recipients: Clarita Maddox, 35 years; Jesse Bensley, 20 years; Steve Movius, 10 years; Frank Voss, 10 years; Dwayne Trammer, 10 years; Ian Guerrero, 5 years; and Jeff Booth, 5 years. Thank you for your service. Port staff joined Commissioner Harding in actively participating in the Experience Olympia and Beyond Thurston County's Destination Master Planning Visioning Workshop. This event signifies a positive stride toward promoting the outstanding features of our region through collaborative efforts with community stakeholders and organizations. Thank you, Commissioners Harding, Isles, Sanders, and Vasavada, along with Port staff, for attending the WPPA Port Legislative Days on February 1st and 2nd to meet with legislators, advocate strategic initiatives for our community. The port's commitment to Thurston County was demonstrated through our proactive and collaborative approach. Swantown Marina and Boat Works staff, along with the marketing team, attended the West Coast's biggest boat show, February 2nd through 10th. Thank you to the team for your dedication and hard work, highlighting our marina and greater Thurston County region as a destination for the boating community. Our Butt Inlet Restoration Project has created the opportunity to partner with the Evergreen State College to bring field experience for their environmental program students. The partnership reinforces the port's commitment to environmental stewardship and contributes to developing the next generation of leaders in the field. Thank you to the port staff, commissioners, and community members for supporting our Port of Olympia Executive Director recruitment efforts. The public reception was attended by nearly 100 community members, followed by an all-staff lunch meet and greet the following day. And as usual, we value your input. Public comment opportunities are listed there, and we look forward to hearing from you. And I will not refer to X as the formerly something.
All right, thank you, Executive Director Rudolph. Is there any questions or comments for me? No? All right. Well, we'll move along then to public comment. Individual public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Members of the public may comment on agenda items and other port business. And just a note for the guidelines for public comment can be found in the commission rules and resolution 2022-09, Article 6. Comments should be directed to the commission. Comments should be directed to the commission as a whole and should not include comments about individual port staff or members of the public. All speakers shall be courteous in language and demeanor and shall confine remarks to those facts that are germane and relevant to the questions or issues under discussion. I don't see any public in person tonight for public comment. So is there anybody on the Zoom?
John Newman.
I'm sorry, who? John Newman. All right. John Newman, if you can hear me, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, John.
Great. I want to recognize the 50th anniversary of the boat decision. It's really helped the recognized tribes of the state of Washington and the rest of the fisheries in the state to move forward into the future. My comment is we want to thank the Port of Olympia commissioners for their tireless efforts to find a good Port of Olympia director. We understand that currently we have 2 candidates for this position under review. We understand that time is of the essence. We also realize the hire for this position is a make or break decision for the port. If the wrong person is hired, there's a huge blowback from the community. If the wrong person is hired, many vital issues are at stake here at the port. The 2 current candidates for this position have worked for the port in the past. Both have had troubled tenures in their job at the port. Both have made errors in the past here at the port. We had hoped that a new slate of candidates could be reviewed, in which the recipient is paid almost $200,000 a year. We realize that time is of the essence. Port employee Rudy Rudolph is retiring and his replacement is sorely needed. This has been an expensive search and the effort has been huge. We want to leave you tonight with a sentiment expressed by many in our community. We have before us a very expensive cleanup Butt Inlet. The cleanup is vital to the community and the cleanup is long overdue. The person who will be hired for manager will oversee the cleanup of Butt Inlet. This person must have the appropriate skills for this task. The person must have a scientific background. The person must know the laws in place that guide this effort. The person must be able to talk constantly with the Department of Ecology on the cleanup. You cannot have a mistake in this cleanup process. We cannot leave a mess in our local waters and Butt Inlet for future generations. Many of us support the effort take the toxic mess and transport it out of this area. We do not support leaving the compounds on the isthmus for future generations to deal with, especially with sea level rise, especially with constant flooding of the area in future years. We hope the port can hire someone to make sure the toxic messes is gone forever. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Anyone else on Zoom for public comment?
No.
All right, then we will move along with the agenda. We have 3 items left on the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Commissioner Vasavina.
Thank you for continuing to guide us on parliamentary matters. Does the fact, if we approve these items being on the consent calendar, does that mean there's no more questions or discussion of them and we simply move to approval?
Generally, the consent calendar moves directly from motion and second to a vote.
To vote.
If you would like to say something, no, I'm certainly can be flexible.
I believe we had asked some questions, unless I'm confusing it, about the contract amendment for Chris Reeve in our previous, when it was under advisory. And I think Director Gilbertson might have been preparing to return and answer those questions.
Okay with you, the two of you? All right. Yeah, Sean, if you have something you can share with us, that'd be fine.
Good evening, Commissioner. Sean Gilbertson, Director of Environmental Planning and Programs. Commissioner Vasavina, you had asked at our last commission meeting the advisory presentation for the Chris Reeve insurance recovery contract. You asked if that was a competitive bid for that contract, and it was not. It was a personal services contract, which per state law does not need to include competitive selection process. And the contract was entered into under the authority of the executive director at the time. And I have consulted with the previous executive director on that to ensure I received the correct information. And then I consulted with Port Council on that too, who's here to help if you have any further questions on it.
Thank you, Sean.
You're welcome.
Is there any further discussion? All right.
I had further questions about this, about the metrics for kind of what is expected to. So what happened was the first contract was entered into within the executive director's authority for just under $50,000. And at this point, we're being asked and proposed to authorize a continuation of this for $100,000. The inspection of insurance, identifying insurance policies that might be in place, could be thought as something that will possibly yield significant benefits to the port.
Correct.
Are there any metrics in terms of, although we don't know what they might turn over, what are the pay points, or what can we expect to get in this new contract, or will it continue to be a just per hour bill as you do without, we talked about this, without concrete deliverables?
Yes, thank you for that question. There are deliverables, and thus far, as part of the contract, a policy chart has been put together that tries to account for all possible policies during the subject time frame. A summary report has been put together detailing the insurance coverage throughout that time. And the main deliverable to this point was lost policy notifications were sent to 17 different insurers and brokers that ask for any policies that may be on record that we don't have access to. Right now, we're currently waiting and we're receiving responses from those insurance companies, basically telling us whether or not we had coverage. And the next step, which is what this, and this is for a $50,000 amendment is what we're seeking. This will get us through the analysis of the responses from these insurance companies to then determine next steps, whether it's litigation or whether we're asking for the insurance company to help defend, which is called the duty to defend. And I'm no attorney, so I'm trying to understand what this means. But essentially, it would help the port continue its investigation of the current condition out there and possible solutions to the pollutants in the sediment. So the next delivery will be a full report on all of the policies analyzed and the information received from the insurance companies. And we expect to have this work completed sometime in late spring, early summer.
Thank you, Director Goodleton. The other thing we discussed was sort of a vagueness in the scope of services. Are you making any changes to the contract besides the amount, or are you addressing specificity in the scope of services?
At this point, we're just asking for the additional funding to get us through to the next logical stopping point. And what we're going to propose is that we have a special session or some meeting with the commission and include Mr. Reeve to discuss the findings of the project and the anticipated return and the next steps. And that would also include our port council in that meeting as well. You're welcome.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Hearing no further discussion, I will call for the vote. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Right, motion passes. The consent calendar has passed. We have no pending issues this evening. We have nothing on the action calendar, no action other calendars, so we can jump right to the advisory calendar, which we have first up on the advisory calendar is CSD contract, Ben McDonald. You have the floor, sir.
Okay, is this thing working now? Let's find out. It wants to. I can hear it. It wants telling me that it wants to.
I can do it for you, but if it's green, it should be working.
No, you're fine. I'm getting nothing. We'll proceed. Good evening, commissioners. As the screen suggests, I am Ben McDonald, the Director of Human Resources and Administration. Today is an advisory presentation regarding the CSD contract, and we'll just simply review the contract and gather any information or data that you guys would like to see before we come back for consent. A little background on Schmelik, Sick and Davis. They are a legal firm out of Seattle, I want to say, Bellevue. They provide legal services to ports and other jurisdictions. They specialize in public contracting, employment and labor law, open government issues, and local agreements. We have used Richard Davis from Schmelik, Sicken and Davis to provide counsel to the port during our contract negotiations with ILWU Local 47B. And we have we're currently using their services as we're in mediation through PERC. The original contract or letter of engagement is what it was from CSD. It approved up to $49,000 in 2022 per the policy and the executive director's delegated authority. That was amended in 2023 for a not to exceed amount of $100,000, and it expired just this past year. We allowed that contract to expire on purpose. The previous agreement was a letter of engagement, which is not abnormal for firms to use for their clients. But we wanted to get it in a port contract format, and so we could track it the way we do with all of our contracts. Additionally, in 2023, Schmelik, Sicken and Davis changed the firm's name to simply CSD Attorneys at Law. And then the new contract will better clarify scope of services. Just a little bit more background that I don't have there before we get into the term and the proposed amount. CSD originally entered into an agreement with the Port of Olympia in April of 2022. That contract, after the amendment, went all the way till December 31st of 2023. And while we were approved for $100,000 in that time frame, it was roughly 21 months or so. The port spent $78,929 total. So I want this commission to know that it's not the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've heard thrown around. It's at 78,929 in those roughly 2-year time frame. When I started in September of 22, because my background is negotiations and collective bargaining agreements, we simply asked the attorneys to kind of sit back and let us do some work. From September 22 to February of 23, the port and the union agreed on 16 articles in the contract. Excuse me. Since then, that was to February 2023. We then started talking about wages, and the sides were very far apart, which led us to mediation. When you're in mediation, attorneys are present and help try to get through negotiations. Since then, we've been in mediation, and their attorney has been attending meetings physically here at the port. Just so this commission knows, to cut costs a little bit for us, we've had our attorney attend via Zoom. So we're not paying for travel and full days and food and whatnot. So we are careful on how we spend the money. But getting to the term, this term we're requesting, we're coming back to you for the consent calendar on February 26th, and we're asking it to run through December 31st of 2025 for a total of $100,000. Questions and comments? Next steps, as I mentioned, to bring forward to the February 26th consent calendar. Happy to take notes.
Thank you, Ben. Commissioner Tong, any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Ben. I had asked about the length of the term and you gave a pretty good response. Do you mind explaining that just for the public?
The length of the term, and we considered a shorter term and a smaller amount because we know this is a big issue. We did that. We went with the longer term and bigger amount to avoid coming back sooner than later to simply say, we're at the 50,000. Can we have more money? I don't anticipate that happening at all. We're very close with negotiations. We've had successful mediations in recent weeks. And so I feel like we're really close. And when we get through wages, I think it's just going to open the floodgates for the rest of the articles in the contract. But I don't know how that's going to go. I can't predict if that will happen. And if it doesn't, then we have a contract in place and representation if we need it. So we talked to our team about that, the term and the amount, and we decided to go for the longer term with the higher amount. So that was the justification for that.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Sanders?
Oh, I just wanted to comment on how the progress is going, and thank you, Ben, for updating about the progress and that it looks like it's coming to a, closer to an agreement.
Fingers crossed.
And so I appreciate that effort and to get to a resolution is exciting. So thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Commissioner Posada.
I have a question and a comment.
Sure.
Then my question is, when the contract was amended in 2023 for an amount not to exceed 100,000, what was that process? Was that done without commission?
No, it was brought back before before the previous commission.
And the previous commission, when
They
was
gosh, I don't have the date. I think it was July of 2023, and they approved an amendment of $50,000.
and so in July, they approved something to extend it another 6 months and another $50,000.
Correct.
And my comment is, first of all, I want to thank you for really clearly, I'm now awake and hip to the fact that you're recommending bringing it forward as a consent item. And I think it's going to be important to identify where there's questions pending and maybe not bring those forward as consent items if we're going to have more discussion the following time. It doesn't sound like my other commissioners have a lot of questions pending. I have some concerns. I would like to be able to send a signal that we expect this to be wrapped up in 6 months. And I would also like to align this timing so that when a new executive director comes in, they have reason to review and rethink kind of how we go forward with our contract for legal representation. So for that reason, although I do understand it's more staff work to have to keep coming in front of the commission, I am feeling that I'd be more comfortable with another contract for 6 months for about the $50,000 scope, or even a little bit more. But that sends a signal that we really are working to get to agreement on wages with the union and get this wrapped up. That's my comment, and it's really
Okay,
to my
thank you.
co-commissioners too,
Yeah.
in case for their consideration.
I have a question, Ben. Did the original contract include miscellaneous legal services?
Yes, it actually did. So their letter of engagement, it spoke about the contract bargaining with ILWU, but it also gave them the ability to help with some other legal issues that we encountered, such as environmental, even some labor and employment law stuff that they helped with that was outside of the ILWU bargaining. And then our hope was just to clarify that scope, moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's really important that a contract of this amount and this duration, it's really important that we understand the full scope of the contract. So when I see the contract is to provide miscellaneous legal services, including labor relations and collective bargaining, that's a
Just to clarify, that's just a background on who they are and what they do, not necessarily the details of our contract. So
well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
So
yeah, the background is that they provide those types of services just overall. We're more narrow in our.
yeah, and I would feel more comfortable if the commission understood the full scope of the services that could be provided under this contract.
Sure.
And simply because I think the main thing we're looking for and the help is the collective bargaining.
Right.
And so, I don't want it to be interpreted that we're approving a contract that gives, kind of carte blanche to other tasks as well without fully understanding what those tasks are.
Certainly. Yeah, and I can bring that updated scope of services to our time on the 26th.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Comment, I would agree with Commissioner Masavada that 6 months, I think, would be a good time to review this and talk about it again.
So a follow-up comment is then, instead of putting it forward as a consent item, if we're going to be considering possibly an alternate recommendation, or as a group, whether we want to go with 6 months or the year, or and the clarification of scope, perhaps it should be in a different area of the agenda where discussion is expected.
Yes, and I think we can discuss that when we're looking at where it's going to go on the agenda. Once we have that, I would suspect that it would likely wind up on action other.
Great.
So
Thank you.
And thank you, President, IL, for clarifying the scope. That would be really good for me as well.
all right, thank you, Ben. Next on the advisory calendar is the FAA grant funding process. Warren Hendrickson, Director of Operations, looking dapper this evening.
Extraordinaire.
Yes, you have the floor, sir.
I'm gonna try this. Working. Good evening, Commissioners. Warren Hendrickson, Director of Operations. Tonight's discussion on the FAA funding process covers a lot of territory. There's a lot of moving parts. There's no need to commit anything to memory. There's a lot of information. The packet and the information will be always available online, available for your resource for future. So it's, do not expect to commit it to memory or to absorb it all in just one evening of discussions. This particular process in discussion tonight has its foundings at the orientation meeting that we hosted with you last month. And the discussion was whether or not to first start off with a tutorial on the airport master plan update, or to go forward and just speak to the FAA funding process. And the information that came back to us was to start with this. So that's how this particular conversation started this evening. So the presentation tonight is advisory only, no action required, nor will there be any additional action required at any further meeting. This will be just this evening's presentation alone. Many topics to cover, each of them interrelated, but you can see the bullets there and I won't repeat them. Each one leads to the next, and I will walk you through the process every step of the way. It's meant to be an informal conversation, so feel free to stop me as you go along. We'll have plenty of time for additional questions and comments at the end, should there be any. First and foremost, the language associated with the funding process and the grant funding process for airports has a terminology and a dictionary unto itself. And the end result is a brief understanding of what we have. The first one, FAA, is the regulatory body. It's part of the National Department of Transportation. It falls within DOT on a national basis, and we call it the FAA. The FAA has created a national plan of integrated airport systems. The word is NIPIAS. You have to be a member airport within the NIPIAS to be eligible for federal funding. There are 5,193 public use airports in the United States. 3,300 of them are within the NIPIAS as identified by the FAA. Olympia Regional Airport is one of those NIPIAS airports. AIP, or Airport Improvement Program, is in fact the vehicle by which federal funding is provided to public agencies that own airports. The program is administered by the Airport District Office. The FAA is split into several regions. We lie in the Northwest Mountain region. That region covers 7 states from Colorado to the Pacific coast. And it has 3 separate airport district offices, one in Denver, one in Helena, Montana, and one in Seattle. The Seattle Airport District Office controls all of the funding process and the FAA approvals for our airport. That office serves both the states of Washington and Oregon. An airport sponsor in FAA speak is another term meaning airport owner. So if you think of sponsor, think of owner, and that means the Port of Olympia, as the owner of Olympia Regional Airport, is the airport sponsor for the airport. We will also talk some more about, and why it's in quotes, is the definitions airside and landside. And they're in quotes because they are informal as opposed to formal definitions. Airside typically means anything associated with aviation activity on the airport, generally inside the airport fence. Landside could be inside the airport fence, but it's not directly associated with aviation activity or the operations that take place on the airport. So when you think of airside, think of runways, taxiways, lighting, weather systems, air traffic control towers, navigational facilities. When you think of landside, think more of infrastructure, fencing, hangars, and the other associated responsibilities that come along with that. Those terms become a little bit more important later on when we talk about what is and what is not eligible for federal funding. In Washington State, there are 132 public use airports. 64 of them belong to the NIPIAS. So we are one of those 64. And then it quit. Nope, next slide. Had it for a second. The AIP funding sources, again, Airport Improvement Program, primarily the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. This fund provides all of the federal grant funding to all the airports nationwide. The trust fund sources are 2 types, primarily user fees and fuel taxes. I'm going to come back to the fuel taxes in a moment, but the user fees are typically for commercial service airports, what you would see added to each individual airline ticket as a passenger facility charge, or PFC. The funds collected from PFCs and those types of user fees are actually collected and kept in a separate bucket for funding. So we are not a commercial service airport, so none of our funding comes from any level of PFC contributions that take place at the commercial airports. But your SeaTac, your Spokane, your Tri-Cities, your Bellingham, your Boeing Fields, they would have access to PFCs because they are commercial service operations. The fuel taxes, you would think of fuel taxes being a tax on the community, but in fact, these are taxes paid by the users. And that's a very important distinction. These are user fees. You pay at the pump for the privilege of flying, whether you're a commercial operator or an individual aircraft owner and pilot or a business. The current rate for federal purposes, 29 cents per gallon Jet A and 19.4 cents per gallon for avgas. There are other miscellaneous, other revenue resources that do apply that feed the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. But overall, in 2023 nationwide, there was over $3.2 billion of grant awards to the nation's airports. Now, the specific types of funding is a list of different buckets within the types of funding that we're eligible for here at Olympia. The first one is automatic. By virtue of the fact that we are a NIPIAS airport in the system, we automatically qualify for non-primary entitlement funding, NPE. That's $150,000 per year automatically. We don't have to do anything. It's ours to draw on for whatever projects that we have that may be eligible for the use of those funds. You don't have to use it all in 1 year. You can take and stack it up for up to 4 years before it's lost. So you could actually save it for 4 years and have $600,000 to then put toward an eligible project, go forward from there. It's important to note that the fact that we are not a commercial service airport limits us to $150,000 a year. Compare that to Friday Harbor, which is a commercial airport with fairly light aircraft, Kenmore primarily and a few other operators. It has over 10,000 passengers a year. Their non-primary entitlement funding is $1 million per year. So just for the fact that an airport of similar size to ours with commercial service and 10,000 passengers a year can 6 times the amount of NPE funding. And again, the same 4-year rollover maximum still applies. There's another category, which is pretty much transparent and invisible to us as the user and to the port, but the FAA distributes a certain amount of its funding across all 50 states. The last year that those numbers were available was 2022, and Washington State had over $5 million of state apportionment funding. All of the rest of the funding that the FAA has is called discretionary. And for our purposes, when we apply for a grant, it's a combination of both state and discretionary funding, will often be commingled. In 2023, the Washington State AIP grants across 36 airports was over $94 million. I mentioned that there were 64 NIPIAS airports in the state, of which we are one. So only 36 actually applied and received a grant last year. We did not. We did not have an active grant application in 2023. How do you get access to this funding? There are certain rules for grant eligibility. The first and most important is that you have to be an airport in the NIPIAS, and we are. So that makes us eligible. The eligible projects then also have to meet certain criteria, whether it be for safety, security, reconstruction, capacity, design standards. Other examples include runway taxiway construction or rehabilitation. The difference between construction, reconstruction, and rehabilitation is important. Construction is a new facility, a new runway, a new taxiway. Reconstruction is you have run the life cycle of that particular facility so that it must be completely removed, taken out, and built from the ground up. Rehabilitation means there is still some life left on the facility or the runway or taxiway, and maybe a simple overlay or a crack seal or a little bit less robust level of construction will be necessary to go ahead and maintain its life. Apron are the parking ramps and locations and facilities that lead to hangars and to parking areas and to our aircraft businesses. Lighting, signage, navigation aids, the weather station, planning and environmental studies are covered, safety area improvements, and land acquisition. All of these are eligible uses for federal funding. Generally, we call these airside. Again, when you look at the nature of where these projects occur, they are generally inside the airport fence and directly related to the aviation operations at the airport. Non-eligible projects are generally landside oriented. These are development for exclusive use. For example, if you were going to build a taxiway, which would normally be eligible, but it only serves a single entity, a single hangar, a single business, it's not eligible. So the idea being is that you have to provide multiple users or serve multiple users to be eligible. So exclusive use means you are not eligible. Industrial park development. Around the airport, we have our Clean Water Center and Newmarket Industrial Campus. They are not eligible for any use of the federal funding. Landscaping, maintenance equipment, operational expenses, airport vehicles and artwork, none of these are eligible either.
And
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
talking about, you mentioned the classic pots of federal funding that you're talking about. One is almost like a block grant. and the other is
Well,
discretionary.
block grant only applies to certain states with regard to the FAA. So we have to be careful about the
That's
term.
what
The
we
block
got.
grant has, yes, the block grant has a separate meaning that does not apply to Washington State.
Are there possibly new categories of funding that are not the traditional ones you're addressing that apply more broadly for airport owned or operated properties?
Do you have an example?
Well, I'm just wondering, the federal infrastructure, you're talking about two specific pots of FAA funding administered by FAA. Are there other pots of funding administered by FAA that you're not addressing? in this?
Not in this. This is the FAA grant funding process to maintain Olympia Regional Airport. There may be other grants available, but not through the Airport and Airway Trust Fund and the legacy value that we talk about in our capital budget and the strategic projects that we have outlaid.
Okay, so you're
Or
just
to the
talking,
commission.
you're limited to talking about the Airport and Airway Trust Fund.
That's correct. And one exception on non-eligible projects here is we do have a pending federal grant right now for zero emission vehicles. This is in the 2024 budget. There's 2 zero emission vehicles that we have applied for. We should know in the spring. That comes from, again, a separate earmarked fund for zero emission vehicles. And so as a result, normally vehicles by themselves would not be eligible. But in this particular case, to encourage the electrification of our fleets, the FAA has taken a portion of its funding and made it eligible for these zero emission vehicles. How much funding do you get percentage wise and what are the sponsor shares? Typically, the federal share will be 90% of the eligible costs. So if you have an eligible project, including prevailing wage, sales tax, all reconstruction activities, planning and design, the FAA will pay 90% of the bottom line. That means the airport sponsor share is 10%. There is a supplemental grant program on the state level, and I only mention it this one time tonight, will be the WSDOT Aviation Grant Program. It runs in parallel with its own funding stream for state airports. It is a supplemental grant program in addition to the federal share. It can provide up to an additional 5% contribution for AIP eligible costs. So combined with the FAA, if you are lucky enough to get a state grant, combined with the FAA funding, you could have 95% of an eligible project paid for with grant funding from both the federal and the state funds. That means the cost to the port is 5 cents on the dollar. It is subject to very limited state funds availability. Next week in the work session, I'm going to talk to you specifically about the impact of aviation taxes and what's happening in the state that is severely limiting our funds right now, but that's a discussion for next week. In return for the funding that an airport sponsor receives from the federal government, you make a series of 39 promises, covers 19 pages, and these promises are called grant assurances. It's a very simple high-level document, but essentially these promises focus on the fact that we've given you federal money, we expect you to be good stewards of these resources. And therefore, there's a prohibition on exclusive rights. If you're a public use airport, you have to be open to all unless necessity dictates otherwise. You have to properly utilize and be accountable for use of airport revenue. You have to maintain and operate the facilities, particularly if they were built with federal funds. You must protect your approaches so that you have a safe operating environment. You maintain good title of airport property. You ensure, working with the local land use division, that for us is the city of Tumwater, that there is compatible land use surrounding the airport. And you can see a whole additional series of bullets. Essentially, fair and reasonable terms, no discrimination, You adhere to the approved airport layout plan, which is the document by which the FAA approves projects on the airport. You must sell or dispose of federally acquired property in accordance with certain very strict guidelines. You have to preserve rights and powers for the owner, i.e. we as a public, that's us as a public agency. Obviously attainable, acceptable accounting and record keeping system and compliance with both civil rights and DBE requirements. DBE is disadvantaged business enterprises. So all of these promises are made with every acceptance of a federal grant award. How long do they run? If the grant award was used for land acquisition, the grant assurances last in perpetuity. For all other grants, every time you receive a grant, you start a new 20-year clock. And they run concurrently. So if you get a grant in 2023, that grant assurance runs through 2043. If we get a grant in 2024, that runs through 2044. And you must exhaust all of your grants before you are no longer subject to the grant assurances or run through all those timeframes. Now, in the case of Olympia Regional Airport, the city owned the airport beginning in 1928. The federal government took it over in World War II. And during World War II, it purchased another 1,000 acres around the property, which is now really the home of our Clean Water Center and Newmark Industrial Campus industrial parks, plus adding to the additional land at the airport. In 1947, the federal government gave the airport back to the city of Olympia, who then in turn gave it to the Port of Olympia in 1963. Because most of the land was purchased by the federal government in World War II, there was a permanent deed running on the property in perpetuity. Olympia Regional Airport must always be an airport unless the federal government is paid back for its investment in the property from World War II years. So as a result, the grant assurances, the 20-year clock is just a clock for grants, but for our purposes, based upon the legacy and the history of the airport, it's an airport in perpetuity based upon the acquisition of the lands by the federal government in World War II years. There is a series of additional federal funding that has been provided to the airport based upon the COVID response. There are a lot of acronyms associated with these. The CARES Act, CARISA Act for both the airport and the tower. The ARPA was the American Rescue Plan Act. And the biggest number was the most recent bill that was passed by Congress. That's the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Airport Infrastructure Grant System. CARES and CARISA were both COVID response stipends that were provided early in 2020 and 2021. You can see the dollar amounts that were there. Our spending to date, we have essentially exhausted all of the original 4 grants. The tower one is a little bit interesting because we don't own the FAA control tower at the airport. It is owned by the FAA and they own and operate it. But we do have some airport and port owned equipment inside the tower. And when we had to replace that, we thought, well, that's what that fund's there for. Let's see if we can send the invoice and if we can get reimbursed. And we did, to the tune of $17,000. So whether or not there is any additional funding available under that tower thing, but there is an additional $17,000 there if that equipment should break or there's another opportunity there. But it has to be port-owned equipment that directly supports the tower for that funding to be eligible. The $881,000 can be used almost universally for all airport infrastructure. And this is important because the eligible rules I talked about before when you saw that list, runways, taxiways, lighting, weather, aprons, pavement, not hangars, not hangars. You can't build hangars with federal grant funding, but with BIL, AIG money, we certainly can. It doesn't have the same detailed eligibility criteria. It's a little bit more wide open to create those opportunities and create infrastructure. So as a result, we have $881,000 that has already been obligated to us that we haven't spent yet. The total of this additional federal funding through all 5 of those programs has been over $1 million. Yes?
What's the timeline for spending down that $800,000? Is it expired?
It's a 5-year timeframe. So we have through basically 2029. Each year we are authorized based upon the appropriation. It's been changing between 289,000 to 295,000. So over a 5-year period of time, it's been added up. How then do you begin to apply or at least alert the FAA that you are intending to use some of these grant authorities? There is a 5-year capital investment program project planning cycle, and it is a rolling 5 years. So it is due at the end of August. So for the plan that we submitted at the end of August was for the calendar years 2024 through and including 2028. Next year's will be 2025 through 2029. Typically, the first 2 years are frozen. It takes so long for the FAA to identify the funding, the project, the eligibility criteria, that it almost takes the need to move a mountain to get funding redisposition within the next 2 years. It's not impossible, but it does take a little bit of an effort to go ahead and do that in terms of justification or an emergent need. So typically you're looking at planning horizons that are 3 to 5 years down the road for the most part. That's important because this submission, especially if it's for any near-term investments, takes place before the commission has approved the capital budget for the coming year. So there's a little bit of a gamesmanship, so to speak, in terms of what numbers you think the commission will support, what projects will go forward, what funding's available, and that then rolls right into what the capital budget is. So to some extent, we submit this budget with the assumption that we believe that we've created enough of a business case for the commission to support that when it does come to the budget cycle in the third and fourth quarters of the year.
And in theory, they've already approved it as part of the previous 5-year plan.
Correct. So what are the keys to success in accessing this funding? Clearly, you have to thoroughly understand the roles of the FAA to the state and the airport role within the system. And as always, it's a question of building relationships. Strong credibility with the airport district office staff. They break down into planners, environmentalists, and the project managers that actually oversee the engineering of given projects and the eligibility projects. So having a working knowledge of each other's needs and opportunities is very important. Also, be an effective planner. If you're going to make a plan, make sure you stick to that plan and be ready to execute when they provide you the dollars to do that. There was another airport in Puget Sound that had been working for 17 years on a project. And when it came down to the FAA issuing the grant, the airport sponsor did not have the matching funds and they had to turn the grant down. That is not a good example to set. So you want to build credibility. You want to be shovel ready. So if they call you up and say, we found some extra funds, what can you do with it? You want to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And we're fortunate that we've been able to do that here. You want to execute the project well and within the time constraints. And you also want to make sure that all the paperwork and the invoices are timely filed. I have a great deal of credit to give to Lori Watson, the airport office administrator, who really dots the I's and cross the T's as far as port staff goes to ensure that we remain in constant compliance. There are a lot of paperwork requirements to go ahead and continue to support our airport funding program. What are the talking points for you as commissioners? FAA projects are funded anywhere from 90 to 95% by the users. The users. There are zero tax dollars used to support the airport. We are 100% funded by our New Market Clean Water Center industrial parks and the airport revenues themselves. No use of port tax revenues. By virtue of the fact we are a Nipias airport, we can superiorly leverage our non-tax port revenues. When we can pay only 5 to 10% on the dollar for a port project or an airport project, that is significant. And it's important for us in particular because not only are we the capital city airport, but we are the only public airport in Thurston County with paved runways. And in 1993 through last year, we have accumulated over $28 million in federal grants to support the airport operations. So moving forward, we'll talk about grant funding as we get to the 2024 capital budget. I won't go into the details now. This was mostly a high-level strategic overview. When we look at the individual projects and the grant funding, we'll be bringing back to you in future sessions the overall capital budget, strategic budgets report card as we go throughout the rest of the year. And then we'll get into the weeds a little bit more about what projects are being executed with what grant funding and where that funding's coming from. So you'll get a good feel for that a little bit later down the road. This coming summer will be the next 5-year capital improvement plan. And then also the WSDOT Aviation Review funding challenges, and that will be a completely different subject that I will happily bring to your attention next Tuesday. And one fun fact, we will have an FAA solar airfield lighting research project on the airport. It'll arrive this spring. We'll be there for 18 months to 2 years. This is the FAA Technical Research Center in Atlantic City, New Jersey. They've already explored the use of this type of lighting in Casa Grande, Arizona, and in upstate New York. And they wanted a Pacific Northwest facility. We made ourselves available, and they have chosen us to go ahead and host that facility. So the point of this is to prove whether or not these types of lighting fixtures are suitable for both lights, taxiways, and runways, as well as the signage in this kind of a climate. They believe it is. We believe it is well, and we'll look forward to seeing how well it performs here. We have one runway that is currently unlit and many taxiways that are also unlit. If we in fact can use this type of lighting to go ahead and light additional facilities on the back of the solar energy that we have on a daily basis, that would be a huge expense saving for the port. And happy to entertain your questions and comments. That was a lot of information, so appreciate that.
Commissioner Sanders, you have any questions or comments?
No, I just appreciate the lengthy report, and it gives me a broad understanding of FAA and what we've went through, how much we've received. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Vasavada, any?
Please do correct me as I state facts slightly wrong, because I'm looking to hear from you as an expert on this issue. Over the summer, when I was not yet an elected port commissioner, we were all reading the situation with the Little League ball fields, and I understand that we've moved through that, and thanks to good leadership, we're moving towards a solution with the community. But it did make me want to understand some of the underlying tenets that are what's running with the land. My understanding is the airport owns 800 or more acres, a large amount of area within the city of Tumwater. And that's what I want you to correct my numbers for sure. And that what you're telling us is because the feds had bought it and gave it back to us, that land has maybe assurances on it that are different than grant covenants, but that run with the land? Or is it grant covenants? What I'd like to understand with respect to especially the Little League is what are the promises that land is entailed with because it's airport land?
Well, thank you for the question. I appreciate that, Commissioner. Yes, so a couple of items on that. First, the airport, inside the airport fence is 845 acres. Outside the airport fence in the new Market Clean Water, I've got Cluita here to back me up, but approximately 577 acres, I think, pretty close. So the end result is a little bit less than, 1,500 acres total. That is all considered airport land. All the revenues from that land, regardless whether they're inside the fence or outside the fence, have to support the airport. So there's that piece.
And what's the legal requirement if they have to support the airport? But what's the requirement of how the revenues be calculated, or like, is there specific?
So there are a couple of moving parts to that. So to your other point about the federally acquired land versus the grant acquired land on the grant assurances. So these are the grant assurances, 39 of them. It doesn't matter whether it was a land purchase or a 20-year renewable assurance promise. The same promises apply. So there's not a different, it's not like there's one set of promises for a 20-year grant award versus another set of promises for a land purchase. It's the same promises all the way across the board. So that's part of it. The other part of it is with regard to, and this is where there are a lot of moving parts with regard to the Capital Little League facilities in particular. The first question is, and we didn't address it here tonight, but it would be part of the airport master plan presentation when we come back to you, is understanding the difference between aeronautical use and non-aeronautical use. Aeronautical use is that airport land that is designated either now or in the future to have aviation-related activity. May not have it today, but if it's destined to have aviation activity, it's aeronautical use property
Designated through our master plan.
through our master plan. That is correct. And as approved by the FAA. Everything else that is airport land that is not designated by aeronautical use is by definition non-aeronautical use. So with regard to the Capital Little League facility itself, the first question is, what kind of property is it and how is it being used? And at the time, the Little League started its lease operations there on a temporary, non-conforming basis, 1999. We've been at this for almost 25 years now. That land, that designation had not yet taken place. It was suspected that it would be aeronautical use.
Just undesignated.
It was undesignated. That's why at the time that the port entered the agreement, we're not sure exactly what the use of this property will be. So as a result, we'll allow you to use it on a temporary basis, 1 year at a time. Well, in 2009, 10 years later, the FAA came out with its order. It's formally called an FAA order 5190.6B. It is the airport compliance manual. And in chapter 17, it talks specifically about two requirements for non-aeronautical property rates for leases and also for fair market value. The intent behind this, now again, coming back to the grant assurances, you have high-level promises, 39 promises in 19 pages. You have 17 chapters of dozens of pages per chapter that really get into the weeds. But specifically for the non-aeronautical rates is you have to understand the intent. The intent of the FAA for use of airport land is that non-aeronautical activities subsidize the aviation activities, not the other way around. So specifically, rates charged for non-aeronautical use of the airport must be based on fair market value. If market rent for non-aeronautical use does result in a surplus, well, then that surplus is used to subsidize aeronautical costs of the airport, which is to the benefit of aviation and the traveling public. That's an excerpt. By the same token, fair market value states that fair market fees for use of the airport are required for non-aeronautical use of the airport, and fair market pricing is determined by reference to negotiated fees charged for similar uses of the airport. So in our case, we have a commission-approved aeronautical lease rate as of the 2024 budget of 39 cents per square foot. Last year, it was 35 cents. For our industrial park property, we are typically looking, it's a case-by-case basis, lease by lease, but right now we're looking at 48 cents per square foot. So right now, our industrial property is far more valuable than our aeronautical use property by 9 cents a square foot. In part, that is because we are limited to some extent by the habitat conservation plan or lack thereof. So we don't have as much marketing opportunities available for aeronautical use property until we get that ACP incidental take permit. But that's how that works in terms of that process. The other part of this that came out, and all of this is available too on our port website. If you go to the airport page, there is a direct link to the ball fields at Olympia Regional Airport. And that document talks specifically about aeronautical use, non-aeronautical use, how the rates were derived and come about. But in particular, I will read this one section too, that in addition to then the grant assurances, and there's two parts of the grant assurances that do apply to the same question. Number 22 is the number 22 promise of 39 is an economic non-discrimination. Everybody has to be treated the same. I cannot allow the Little League to use non-aeronautical property or aeronautical property for one rate and have somebody else use non-aeronautical property and pay market rate. That's a discrimination economically, which is prohibited from the assurances. So that's where you have to involve the FAA. The other one is a disposal of land. And part of that, that's promise number 31. And in that promise, if a land is not currently being used for aviation purposes, i.e. aeronautical use, but is destined to be, then you have to protect it accordingly. And our master plan update has proven that the land that the Little League fields sit on today is destined for future aviation activity. So therefore, from those promises, there's a lot of moving connections here, but you have the compliance manual that dictates that non-aeronautical use subsidizes aeronautical use, not the other way around. You have the grant assurances for economic discrimination and disposal of land that dictates that. And then lastly, the final coup de grace is when you have questions of this type, you go right to the experts in the FAA Airport District Office up in Seattle, and you ask the question specifically, is the Capital Little League lease required to pay market rate? And the answer in direct was March 23rd, 2023. The FAA compliance program officer, whose responsibility is to interpret all of these documents, states, quote, the deed restrictions and the contractual obligations the port has with the federal government require that this land at the airport must receive a fair market rate for non-aeronautical use. There are no waivers to this requirement. So that set in motion that, okay, we have a duty to comply because we want to maintain eligibility for this funding. So how do we do this? And again, the FAA is quite reasonable. They don't expect magic overnight, but they do expect the path to compliance. So the end result of the resolution over the last 6 to 8 months actually was over a year. From the time we identified this issue was September 2022 until we got the lease signed was December, so it was over 15 months. But ultimately, what we agreed that it wasn't about the port actually gaining the money. It wasn't about the money. It was about this demonstrating compliance. So the Little League has committed to raising over the next 4 years of leases, $400,000 for eventual relocation or new fields elsewhere. That, by the end of that 4-year period, would have been sufficient to pay market rate. So the fact that they are committed to doing that and are going to be raising that money, they don't need to write us the check. But the fact that that money is there and sequestered for their future use, we were able to take that to the FAA and show the program that here's where we are today. Here's what they have committed to do. Is that sufficient? And they said, yes, we have no objections.
Thank
So-
you so much. That was an excellent explanation for me. And I apologize, Commissioner President, if this is rehashing things you're well aware of, but for me, having been on the outside, it really helps me understand where we are now. Thank you.
Commissioner Tong, any questions?
No comments, but thank you, Rudy. Thank you, Warren. I really appreciate that.
Sure, my pleasure, my pleasure. Okay, thank you very much,
I have
Commissioners.
one
Yes, sir.
tiny question.
Yes, sir.
On the grant assurances on page 11, slide number 11, you talked about compliance with civil rights and DBE requirements.
Mhm.
So what does that pertain to? Like contracting on?
Exactly, exactly. We file a DBE program with the FAA every year. And we state, here's our DBE goals. And they're approved and reviewed based upon the demographics of Thurston County and the types of projects that we're going to do and the type of construction firms that exist. And then, so therefore, when we go out to bid, there is a DBE requirement for all bidders to be successful. Now, it doesn't mean we'll always meet the DBE requirement. It's difficult sometimes with the county, with the demographics that we have here. But in any case, and especially with the nature of the skilled expertise for certain contracts, but the end result is they have to show a good faith effort and demonstrate that in their bid package to be considered applicable and responsive to the bid.
So is that restricted to federal DBEs or do state DBEs also?
Well, the state DBEs, if we want to apply for the federal grants, but yes, it has to be a federal DBE program. But I believe, they're flexible enough. I mean, if there's a means by which we can achieve a DBE goal, the FAA is going to take whatever avenue that will help meet that goal.
Can you restate what DBE?
Disadvantaged business enterprise.
All right, thank you, Warren.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can find my place again. Next up is Climate Resiliency Grant, Olympia Sea Level Rise in Deschutes Estuary. Sean Gilbertson, Director of Environmental Planning and Programs. You have the floor, sir.
All righty. Thank you again, Commissioners. Sean Gilbertson, Director of Environmental Planning and Programs. And tonight I bring an advisory item that is a good news item. We are applying with our partners to a climate resiliency grant to address sea level rise at Port of Olympia and downtown Olympia. We're also working with the Deschutes Estuary team on this grant. So again, it's an advisory presentation, no action needed. I'm going to cover kind of the basics of sea level rise, the collaborative that we've formed down here in the port and the Olympia area, the Olympia Sea Level Rise Response Plan, which is, by the way, right here. A great document. You can find it from links from our website. If you go to Environment and Sustainability, it's a Olympia Sea Level Rise Response Plan document. So I'll go over a little bit of what's in there, and then I'll describe the grant opportunity. So a little background. These are projections from really the kind of the latest and greatest projections from climate scientists, including University of Washington, NOAA, National Research Center, and they estimate that sometime between 2050 and 2080, we're going to see around 24 inches of sea level rise. And that's pretty significant down here in being on the port, on the peninsula. Some of the reasons for the potential sea level rise is, it's global with melting ice, glaciers and whatnot. As the climate warms, water expands, that will also increase water levels, but it's also affected by local things like tides, king tides, especially storms, El Nino, La Nina, different things that can compound and really exacerbate the problem. And we've seen that through Olympia after certain events. There's one such event there. You can see the picture on the right from one of the flooding events. And a lot of times what we see now are the result of king tides and heavy storms that have a lot of precipitation, and the water just doesn't have anywhere to go. What you see on the left there is a modeling output from the Sea Level Rise Response Plan for 24 inches of sea level rise, coupled with a king tide and some stormy weather. Where would the Port Peninsula and downtown Olympia most likely flood? And the modeling says that these are the areas that would be inundated here. You can see the yellow arrows. That is generally where they think the water would breach land and come into the Port Peninsula and inundate parts of the port. And it's not just on the Port Peninsula, it's down at Percival Landing, it's at Deschutes Estuary itself. There's a lot of places where flooding could occur. And recognizing these issues and the potential we have for flooding down at the Port Peninsula and downtown Olympia, the Lock Clean Water Alliance, the City of Olympia, and the Port of Olympia joined together to form the Olympia Sea Level Rise Collaborative. So we all, the three organizations work together under interlocal agreement to address this matter and to try to be proactive in basically building resiliency against sea level rise and other climate change impacts. One of the first work products from the collaborative was the Olympia Sea Level Rise Response Plan. And this plan is very well laid out, reader friendly, and it talks about why are we having sea level rise? So the drivers for sea level rise, the projected levels of increase and what that looks like as far as impacts go to the Port Peninsula. And they look at it from 6 inches of rise, 18 inches, 24, all the way up to 36 inches of sea level rise. And then it proposes different projects and assigns potential costs to those projects that would help build resiliency on the Port Peninsula. And just as an example, some of the things that are proposed in this, particularly to prevent flooding when we have 24 inches of sea level rise, it's raised landscaping. It can be raised walkways or raised roadways. It can be smaller flood walls and things around the perimeter of the port that will help the overtopping during these extraordinary events. And the rendering you see down below is just a kind of a profile of the East Bay area. And one solution would be to elevate the walkway. and that could be built up. You could think of it as kind of a levee next to the river or ocean. And that would build up to whatever elevation was suitable to protect against rising sea levels. So this great opportunity has come along for a grant. It's from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's called the Climate Resilience Regional Challenge Grant. And it's a significant fund of money that we've partnered with our collaborative, that is City of Olympia and Lot, but also with the State Department of Enterprise Services, the Squaxin Island Tribe, Department of Natural Resources. So the Deschutes Estuary team and the Olympia Sea Level Rise Collaborative have joined together to apply for this grant. And specifically, the group is asking for $75 million for this grant. And these grants are awarded for projects that provide solid climate resiliency. And so what we're hoping to get out of this grant award, if we were to be awarded this grant, and there are a lot of applicants, so I don't want to say that, you know, give any odds on whether we'll get it or not. But what we're hoping is this would help fund these actions outlined in the Sea Level Rise Response Plan. So there's funding built into the grant requests. I've been working with the team to identify those areas where we would actually need to do projects to raise the ground up. So what we're asking for is funding to help implement the Sea Level Rise Response Plan for up to 24 inches of sea level rise. And it would also fund a significant portion of the Deschutes Estuary project. And the Deschutes team, when they were here, they noted that in the environmental impact statement for the Deschutes Estuary, they predict that completing that project by itself will actually lower high tide levels down here. Will give water somewhere to go besides just in Butt Inlet. So the two projects together, the accomplishing the Sea Level Rise Response Plan and the Deschutes Estuary Restoration, will bring to bear quite a bit of protection and resiliency against climate change and sea level rise. So we're really excited about it. The applications are due this week, so it's been a mad dash to get everything turned in time, but we have really good partners that are helping prepare this grant, and hopefully we'll know whether we've been awarded any of the funding sometime at late spring, early summer. So it's a ways off, and then funding would likely be available starting in 2025. So we're hopeful. We want to make sure the commission was aware of the grant application. There is a zero match for it, so really good news for us as an organization. That's really all I have on it, but happy to try and answer any questions or hear comments.
Commissioner Zabata, you have any questions or comments?
Well, thanks for sharing the good news, Director. And I'm glad you were able to resource that. It's a Herculean task chasing these grants. And I would love you and Director Rudolph to let us know if you think that the current budget is providing the full resources necessary to pursue every good grant opportunity out there, or if there's any way the commission can help.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Sean. I greatly appreciate all this information. Very helpful. And yeah, I would agree with Jasmine. Keep us apprised on if you have other grants that you're looking towards and you're limited on resources.
Will do. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, Sean, thank you. That's great information. I just want to mention that I know that there are a group of tribes in the area who are pursuing a NOAA grant for educational funds. And I'm hoping at some point I can help make a connection that we might be able to, you know, we've talked about the sea level rise projects and the Butt Inlet projects and being a model for how we you know, deal with these issues. And so I'm hoping we can also create some kind of an educational opportunity to go along with these projects. And, but, you know, we can talk about that later, but I just wanted to point it out that I think there could be an opportunity.
I would embrace that. Thank you.
So,
Is there any need for letters of support from our delegation or from other people in the greater area Someone spearheading that for us?
We did, yes. I was able to get one from the Chamber of Commerce, and each partner had different letters of support that they sought, and we received them from probably 15 or 20 different organizations. So really good support for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, the final item on our advisory calendar is the delegation of authority resolution. This will be the commissioner's opportunity to express what you're looking for maybe in this resolution to give some direction to Executive Director Rudolph. So let's see, can we start with Commissioner Tong? Do you have anything you'd like to say on this topic?
Yes, I'm glad we moved it to advisory. I think this is one of our key documents that we need to take time to really plan on. The most important thing to me is that it's complete and comprises everything that we had before, and then continue working on it. But I don't have any specifics that I want to change or work on at this time.
Commissioner Sanders?
I don't have any comment on it right
Okay.
now.
Commissioner Vasavin?
Thank you, Commissioner President, Ayala, and Commissioners. I was the one who raised this, and thank you, staff, for compiling these three. When we had our orientation, we were presented one of these three resolutions as our delegation of authority, and it was very important to me that as we are new electeds, and even Commissioner Ayala and Commissioner Harding, that we have authorities that have been granted by previous commissioners, Commissioner McGregor, Downing, and Zeta, and that it's a good practice for us as we launch our work now and with a new executive director to brush these off, look at them, and ideally my direction to staff would be to do a little research into what are best practices at similar sized ports right now in their delegation of authority to come up with some recommendations. One thing I've heard is we're now searching for an executive director. I'm sure others are also hearing from members of the public who've been part of your support base or part of the people who've been most actively concerned about the port. And I've heard a lot of concern, for example, about the port in historically entering long-term leases where people feel that that was done largely by an executive director without input from the commission. In truth, the final decision to enter the lease is absolutely needs to be approved under our current delegation by the commission, but there may be touch points and other ways that we as a commission can stay closer to community expectations if we consider those in a delegation of authority memo. One challenge I'm seeing is Director Rudolph has stated, this takes significant staffing to do additional work on this. And so we're going to have to figure out how we resource a little look into best practices and where what areas we might want to tweak or address with leasing, with contracting, with these personal service contracts that are starting at $49,000 and then becoming $200,000. I can do a little work on it. That's a little unusual. Usually this is done probably with the staff coming back with recommendations. But I think one thing we're seeing is we're not staffed that way right now. So I'd love to ask you for discussion about how you could see us proceeding in getting to something that will reflect our real relationship with the new executive director, where we want them to come to us, and where we consider things operationally in the weeds, and they should just run and don't have to come back and consult.
Thank you. I will just say that I think there's certainly value in condensing or compiling the resolutions to one. I think we kind of need to be a little bit patient that we, as Commissioner Vasavita said, it's going to take some, to do it right, you have to really kind of analyze the policies that you've got right now. You got to check for redundancy, and you got to, if this is a great time to add anything that we may feel would be relevant. I mean, ultimately, it's a resolution that should be created by the commission. It's our resolution. It's our direction to the executive director, and without trying to put too much on Executive Director Rudolph, maybe we should ask our legal counsel, Rick Hughes, to have a once over on it and maybe come back with recommendations from a legal standpoint. But I think we're heading in the right direction. I guess I would ask where would we like to see, what would be our next step? Where would the commission like to see this come back to us, and in what form? Go ahead.
It feels almost like it's a charter, it's a review of our charter for the new executive director. And the challenge when people are new is, how do you know what are the pinch points, the risk areas, or the areas where there's a range of options, right? This is the most, the longest leash basically. And here's what an example of an entity who put a short leash on this issue, and here's why. So I don't know if there's the possibility of getting that kind of a briefing, like say a month from now, of key points, or whether we could consult with an attorney like Fred Schmelik, who works more with courts, who in fact trained us on these delegations. I did post to my social media kind of his take on why this is something we should be doing every year. May I ask, is this something that would be within your bailiwick to put together kind of a range of options on different key points?
Well, thank you for the question. I do believe I could handle this, but I also believe that I'm not sure that I have the capacity to do that within your time frame. So it might make sense to contact Mr. Schmelik about that, or somebody in that regard. I'd kind of like to understand exactly what it is you would like me to do, and if I have that, I could.
Well, I think if we're asking for solely a legal review, you might be the right person, Rick. But if we are asking for a full review and someone who has port perspective, I think Frank Schmelik might be the one for us. He has pretty solid port perspective from what he was going over at WPPA. He's worked with many ports for many years, it seems like. So if we needed help reviewing, maybe after a first commissioner work session, we could take it.
Commissioner
to that
Sanders?
next level.
Commissioner, if I could just add, the contract with CSD that we had the advisory on tonight that had been presented. Schmelik is the individual that Rick just referenced, and there, I would just throw it out there, maybe an opportunity there if you wanted to view that contract in addition to what it came to tonight, to have any additional capacity, that is certainly an option.
But we don't actually have them under contract right now.
Correct. That was the advisory tonight that he brought to you. And it would simply just be amending the scope to clearly articulate what it is that you're asking them to do with regard to this.
Yeah, Commissioners, I do remember Commissioner Posavita mentioning that earlier that perhaps it would be a good idea for a court counsel or an experienced, perhaps a CEO or CEO to review the document and sort of give recommendations on best practices for courts. So that might be an option to consider too. I think the legal review to me is sort of secondary to the delegation of authority.
I think my challenge is I would like to, I have specific things that I'd like to address. And if I could consult with someone about those, I could come and bring recommendations. But I don't know how to do it as a commissioner in a group, or whether you could delegate a subcommittee of us to go work with someone like Frank Schmelik or consultant. And I think it would only be like an hour-long interview really for me to kind of say here's, and then maybe a few hours of follow-up where I'd say here are pinch points that I perceive and I'd like to understand what options are out there. So is there a way to resource that?
Well, I think that would have to be a commission. I don't want to give the perception that one commissioner is
Right.
creating this resolution. So I think you can certainly express your points, but I think it needs to be with the commission. So I think we should look at, I personally think we should look at, whether that's in a work session coming up, that we do have a consultant come in and listen to that and listen to what we want to have in that somebody that can help us actually create that document. So I agree. I just don't know that we can do it like overnight.
And with public hearing, because what I think I'm hearing from members of the public is a lot of concern about kind of things from the past. And we have a new opportunity right now. And part of our new opportunity is the governance of the 5 of us who are elected. Part of it is the choice of the new executive director. And part of it is the clarity of the relationship between that. And I'd like the public to have a chance to speak to that as well. So to see, now they know, because this is in the packet, hopefully that the current proposed delegation is really the 3 existing delegations. And if they have concerns about kind of how far we're going or how much discretion the executive director is, maybe they would have an opportunity to speak to that as well and for us to integrate that input. So maybe it is scheduling a work session with a consultant who could facilitate the conversation.
So if Commissioner Tong and Commissioner Sanders agree, we can have this conversation with Rudy on Wednesday. We're going to meet with Rudy on Wednesday talking about agenda items.
Oh, that was tomorrow.
Tomorrow at 1:30 now.
Oh yeah, never mind.
Because
Tomorrow.
Okay.
We'll have that discussion where we can see we can fit this in. Is that okay? Okay. Anything else? Is there, anything else on the delegation of authority resolution? All right. So we, at this time would be, accepting public comment on our advisory calendar. Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to make public comment?
Yeah, Carla Wolfsburg.
Welcome, Ms. Wolfsburg. If you can hear us,
Yes, I have my sound up as high as it can go, and I struggle to hear Commissioner Vasavada. It's really hard. So I think I will just say that right off the bat here. But good evening, commissioners. I just want to address something regarding Mr. Hendrickson's presentation. And it really is all about the promises that he mentioned that come with the 39 promises and grant assurances. And just going back to January of last year, Mr. Hendrickson graciously held a town hall, and it was about the airport master plan update, at which time he answered a lot of questions from the public. And one question directly related to the obligations attached to the port's acceptance of FAA funding. Now, this related to the funding of the airport master plan update. And one example that he explained was that as a result of the port taking this funding, the Olympia Airport is now required to accept any commercial aviation company that wants to build a terminal and start service here, assuming their planes fit with our runways. So, he indicated that the public nor the commissioners would have any control because of those obligations. And he mentioned again tonight, the effect lasts for a period of 20 years. So I would just ask that you commissioners think very seriously about taking FAA funding because it really does result in a loss of control over the airport. And this is a major public concern. And I think Mr. Hendrickson would attest to that because it came up a lot in that meeting last year in January. And there's, at least to my knowledge, one airport in California that has decided not to accept future funding from the FAA so that they might at some point assume local control of their airport. So I just wanted you to be aware of that and maybe pursue it with Mr. Hendrickson to get the full picture of what those promises really could entail for the port. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Wolfsburg. Anyone else for public comment this evening on the advisory calendar?
Lee Reiner.
Welcome, Ms. Reiner. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Yes, I I agree with the former speaker. If the commissioners would speak a little more loudly, we on Zoom would be able to hear you. And then the other speaker took thoughts out of my own brain regarding this presentation by Warren Hendrickson. Many of us attended that Little League meeting with Warren Hendrickson and the Port of Olympia last year in Tumwater. Many of us were there with the parents who had been helping their children use those fields there at the Tumwater Airport for years and years. And the Little League putting money into the infrastructure for their children. And now, of course, these huge costs for the Little League. I don't know what has been decided on that issue. But as was said by the past speaker, accepting funding from the FAA is problematic. And I hope our commissioners do their due diligence and really research what this entails. Because as was said, the airport master plan is going to dictate what happens with that property. And if you look at the old airport master plans, there was some of us had been shown a larger expansion of the terminal, then parking lots, the new hangars, the new taxiways to the terminals. Many of us have seen private jets come in and use the Tumwater Airport. The rest of us cannot use private jets. We drive up to SeaTac if we have to go on an airplane, but there are those of us billionaires essentially who have their own private jets and are using our airport. In fact, I happen to know one of those billionaires. They could come in on a SeaTac airport, but no, it's more convenient to come in Tumwater. And they have the money to have their own private jet. And so who is paying the cost for these billionaires to fly in to our airport and use the facilities there? Is the taxpayers? Certainly it's not the cost of gasoline. It seems cheap enough, or fuel for these jets. As you know, our community spoke loudly when there was discussion of using our Tumwater Airport for the expansion of the SeaTac Airport. Now we have still a discussion on the table of expanding the Tumwater Airport through the master plan. We must do our due diligence to find out, do we want to go down this road? We have a habitat conservation plan. What are we going to do with these endangered species? Do we scrape them off and put them into a new spot, a new reservation? Is this what we want to do with the animals of our forest? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reiner. Are there any other public comment on the advisory calendar? No more public comment. Thank you very much for Ms. Wolfsberg and Ms. Reiner's comments. Moving on to the next agenda item is commissioner reports and discussion. I lost track of who was going to go next. So does anybody have any commissioner reports or discussions? Commissioner Sanders, go ahead.
Yes, since we were on the topic of funding, I just wanted to share with the commission that the ports right now are looking to increasingly looking at decarbonizing their operations and infrastructure using electrification and cleaner fuels. And there's a record amount of funding available to support this transition. At the federal level, agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy are administering grants that can be used to reduce port pollution. These opportunities include the DOT's Port Infrastructure Development Program, the EPA's Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, as well as the EPA's Clean Ports Program. And all of these new funding programs that will be administering $3 billion to reduce pollution at the ports. So there should be a notice of funding opportunity coming forward for the Clean Ports Program, and it's expected to be noticed this month, February 2024. And so I just wanted to share that with my fellow commissioners, and I appreciate the the grant that is moving forward in partnership that was presented earlier this evening. And so I just wanted to put that on the commission's radar about other federal opportunities for decarbonizing operations and infrastructure using electrification and cleaner fuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanders. Commissioner Vasavada, any discussion or comments?
I'm gonna try to speak louder. It's really hard. But I just really want to thank you, Commissioner Ayal, for opening the meeting with not specifically a land acknowledgement, but an acknowledgement about the huge significance of the Bolt decision in our history. And I just want to share from my experience, when I was a legal intern with the Department of Ecology, I had a chance to go up to a big high rise in Seattle with ecology attorneys for a deposition in one of the follow-up hearings on the Bolt decision. And I looked across the table and one of the gentlemen representing the tribes looked at me and he said, "You're on the wrong side of the room." I wanted to share that because when you are gaining professional skill in an area like the environment or environmental law, you have a chance to have different experiences. And maybe sometimes you find in that was US versus Washington litigation that for my values, I was on the wrong side of the room. I wasn't instrumental in that moment, but I want us to keep that in an open mind because I think right now we're at a moment where we're looking for people who have strong environmental experience to come and help us lead the port into the future. And that experience means they will have probably worked on different sides of the table or in different capacities. And I want someone who has experience but can follow the governance of us as elected commissioners. So that's what you've triggered for me. I don't mean to take it as a launching pad, but and I want to thank you and just feel so grateful to you and Commissioner Sanders that on issues of things like a land acknowledgement and how we proceed, I really feel like we can follow leadership from within our commission.
President Isles, can I have a follow-up or a comment? Yes, so I just want to say also thank you because I was prepared to make a statement regarding the Bolt decision and you did an excellent job in presenting about the impacts of that decision on tribes basically nationwide. So I really appreciate that. My dad participated in the Fish-ins and he had the opportunity to meet Marlon Brando down at one of these Fish-ins, prior to the Bolt decision. And so I really, wanted to give you my appreciation regarding that presentation. And I was prepared to make a statement, but you said it beautifully. And so thank you for that.
Thank you. All right, so that brings us to other business. Any other business?
Reports or discussion?
All right, moving on to meeting announcements. Executive Director Rudolph, do you have any meeting announcements?
I do, Commissioner. So on February 13th, tomorrow, 2:30 is special commission meeting here in this room. On the 20th, 3:30 commission work session here, this room. February 20th, that evening is a POCAC meeting. And on Monday, February 26th at 5:30, regular commission meeting here.
All right, thank you, Executive Director Rudolph. Any questions or comments about the meeting announcements?
I have a question. The special commission meeting, it doesn't look like it's followed by a public meeting. Is it noticed this time that we may come together?
It will be noticed appropriately, yes. And it is noticed appropriately. It is a special commission meeting, then you go into executive session, then you come out of executive session into the commission.
So there will be an opportunity for the public we may be in executive session much of the time, but there will be a moment when we
There's
come
no
out.
provision for public comment in the meeting unless the commissioners decide they want to take it for some reason when they come out of executive session.
It's a special meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you. One last thing, Commissioner Vasavada reminded me that I should have noticed or mentioned that Commissioner Harding is not with us this evening. She does have an excused absence this evening though, so, but we miss her and look forward to having her back. I believe tomorrow she'll be with us tomorrow, so. Hearing no other discussion, this meeting is now adjourned.